The weight of silence. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor hummed with the same relentless indifference that had marked the last 72 hours of Barbara's life. She sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside room 314, her weathered hands folded in her lap, watching the second hand of the wall clock tick away the final moments of her son's life. Each tick was a heartbeat he no longer had, a breath he could no longer take. David had been unconscious for 2 days now. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about organ failure, about how the cancer had spread faster than anyone had anticipated. But Barbara didn't need medical terminology to understand what she was witnessing. A mother knows. She had carried this child for 9 months, had felt his first kick, had heard his first cry. Now she was preparing to hear his last breath. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Mary emerged, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Barbara glanced at her watch. 7:43 p.m. Visiting hours had started at 6. Mary's perfectly applied makeup showed no signs of tears, no evidence of the sleepless nights that had carved deep shadows under Barbara's own eyes. "How is he?" Mary asked, her voice carrying just enough concern to sound appropriate, but lacking the raw desperation that should have consumed a wife watching her husband die. "The same," Barbara replied quietly. She had learned over these past few days that fewer words were safer. Each time she tried to share her brief with Mary, she felt as though she were pouring her heart into a vessel with a hole in the bottom. Mary nodded and entered the room. Barbara followed, taking her familiar position in the chair beside David's bed. She reached for his hand. Still warm, still soft, still her little boy's hand, despite the wedding ring that marked him as someone else's husband. Mary remained standing at the foot of the bed, checking her phone. The soft blue glow illuminated her face, highlighting an expression of mild impatience rather than devastation. The funeral home called. They need to know about arrangements. Barbara's grip tightened on David's hand. "He's still alive, Mary." "Barely." The word came out sharp, clinical. Mary caught herself and softened her tone. "I just think we should be prepared. He wouldn't want us scrambling at the last minute. He wouldn't want his wife checking social media while he dies," Barbara thought. But she kept her silence. She had been keeping many silences lately. The nurse entered to check David's vitals, her movements gentle and practiced. She noticed how the young woman's eyes filled with compassion as she adjusted his pillow, how she whispered a soft, "Hang in there," that Mary didn't seem to hear over the sound of her typing. "Mrs. Morrison," the nurse addressed Barbara, recognizing the woman who had barely left her son's side. "Would you like some coffee? There's a fresh pot at the nurse's station." "That's very kind, dear, but no thank you." The nurse smiled sadly and left. Mary looked up from her phone for the first time in 20 minutes. "Barbara, you should go home and rest. I can stay with him tonight." It was the first time in 3 days that Mary had offered to stay. Barbara studied her daughter-in-law's face, searching for the grief that should have been etched there, the same desperate love that was tearing Barbara's heart to pieces. Instead, she saw calculation. "I'm fine here," Barbara replied. Mary's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "You're exhausted, and honestly, all this hovering, it's not healthy. David wouldn't want you torturing yourself like this. David wouldn't want his wife treating his death like an inconvenience," Barbara thought. But again, she kept her silence. The night stretched on with the rhythm of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses' feet. Mary dozed fitfully in the reclining chair she had commandeered, while Barbara maintained her vigil beside David's bed. She whispered to him, stories from his childhood, reminders of birthdays and Christmas mornings, promises that she would take care of his daughter Emma, who was staying with Mary's mother and blessedly unaware that her father was slipping away. At 3:17 a.m., the machines began their frantic beeping. Barbara's hand was still wrapped around David's when his breathing stopped. The medical team rushed in, but Barbara knew it was over. She felt the exact moment when the hand she was holding became just flesh and bone, when the essence of her child left his body. Mary woke to the commotion, immediately pulling out her phone to record the scene before catching herself and putting it away. The gesture was so quick, so instinctive, that Barbara might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. The doctor pronounced time of death at 3:22 a.m. on October 15th. Barbara kissed her son's forehead and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart. I'll take care of everything." Mary was already on her phone, making calls. "Mom, it's over. Yes, just now. Can you keep Emma until after the funeral? I don't think she should see me like this." But Mary didn't look like much of anything. Her eyes were dry, her voice steady. Barbara, whose tears had finally come in silent streams down her weathered cheeks, marveled at her daughter-in-law's composure. The next few days passed in a blur of casseroles and condolence cards, funeral arrangements, and family notifications. Mary took charge with military efficiency, selecting flowers and music with the same detachment she might use to plan a business meeting. She accepted hugs and sympathy with grace, playing the role of grieving widow with Oscar-worthy performance. Barbara watched it all from a strange distance, as if she were observing a play in which she had no lines. People patted her shoulder and murmured about how hard it must be to lose a child, but their primary attention went to Mary, the young widow with her tragic beauty and brave smile. The funeral was standing room only. David had been beloved by his colleagues, his friends, his community. As Barbara sat in the front pew, listening to speaker after speaker talk about her son's kindness, his integrity, his love for his family, she felt a fierce pride mixed with her grief. She had raised a good man. Mary delivered a eulogy that was perfectly crafted, emotionally resonant, and completely hollow. She spoke about their love story, their dreams for the future, their precious daughter. She dabbed at her eyes with the tissue at precisely the right moments. The congregation wept. Barbara didn't cry during the eulogy. She was too busy remembering the conversation she'd had with David just 2 weeks before his diagnosis, when he'd called her late at night, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow?" She had found him at his kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and bank statements. His face was pale, older than his 34 years. "David, what's wrong?" "I think Mary might be having an affair." The words hit Barbara like a physical blow. She sank into the chair across from him, her mind reeling. "Are you sure?" "I hired a private investigator." He pushed a manila folder across the table. "It's all in there. Photos, phone records, credit card statements. She's been seeing someone from her office for about 6 months." Barbara opened the folder with trembling hands. The images were damning. Mary and a man she didn't recognize, kissing in restaurant booths, entering hotels together, their body language intimate and familiar. "Oh, David. I haven't confronted her yet. I need to figure out what to do about Emma first. But Mom, I need you to know something. I've been moving assets around, changing beneficiaries on accounts. If something happens to me..." "Don't talk like that. Listen to me." His voice was firm, urgent. "I've put the house in your name, the cars too. Most of our savings are in an account with you as the primary beneficiary. I know Mary, Mom. I know how she thinks. If I'm not here to protect you and Emma, she'll try to take everything. She'll squeeze you out of Emma's life and disappear with whatever money she can get her hands on." Barbara had protested, had insisted that surely Mary wouldn't be so heartless, but David had been adamant. "Promise me you won't tell her about any of this unless you absolutely have to. Watch her, Mom. See who she really is, and then decide what's best for Emma." 2 weeks later, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The irony wasn't lost on Barbara. David had been preparing for a divorce when death intervened instead. Now, sitting at his funeral, watching Mary accept condolences with calculated grace, Barbara understood that her son's instincts had been correct. Mary wasn't grieving, she was performing, and Barbara was about to find out just how accurate David's predictions had been. The cemetery service was mercifully brief. Barbara stood beside the grave as David's coffin was lowered into the ground, feeling as though part of her soul was being buried with him. Mary stood beside her, one arm around Emma's small shoulders, the other accepting a white rose from the funeral director to place on the coffin. 8-year-old Emma had been quiet throughout the service, her young mind struggling to comprehend the finality of death. Barbara knelt beside her granddaughter as the crowd began to disperse. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy says Daddy went to heaven." "He did, and he'll always love you from there. Will I live with you now, Grandma Barbara?" The innocent question hit Barbara like a knife to the chest. Before she could answer, Mary's hand landed firmly on Emma's shoulder. "You're living with Mommy, baby. Grandma Barbara has her own house to worry about." The words were spoken with a smile, but there was steel underneath them. Barbara met Mary's eyes and saw something cold and calculating that made her blood run cold. The next week was a revelation. Mary moved through David's house like a conqueror, surveying newly acquired territory. She had contractors come in to give estimates on renovations. She sorted through his belongings with ruthless efficiency, boxing up items to donate or discard. When Barbara asked if she could have David's college photo from his desk, Mary shrugged dismissively. "I guess, though I don't know why you'd want to keep dwelling on the past." Barbara bit her tongue and took the photo, along with a few other small mementos that Mary deemed worthless enough to part with. The transformation was stunning in its speed and thoroughness. Within days of the funeral, Mary had removed every trace of David from the main living areas. His books were gone, his favorite chair donated, his coffee mug relegated to a box in the garage. It was as if she were erasing him from existence. But it was Mary's treatment of Emma that truly revealed her character. The little girl, still reeling from the loss of her father, was treated with impatience and irritation rather than comfort. When Emma cried for her daddy at bedtime, Mary's response was sharp. "Crying won't bring him back, Emma. We need to move forward now." When Emma asked if they could visit Daddy's grave, Mary was dismissive. "We don't have time for that nonsense. Your father is gone, and we have things to do." Barbara offered to take Emma to the cemetery, but Mary refused. "I don't want her getting more upset than she already is. What she needs is routine and normalcy, not more reminders of death." But normalcy, in Mary's definition, seemed to involve frequent meetings that required Emma to stay with babysitters or neighbors. When Barbara offered to watch Emma during these mysterious appointments, Mary always had an excuse ready. She needs to bond with other children, not spend all her time with elderly people. The sting of those words was intentional, and they hit their mark. Barbara was 73 years old, not ancient, but Mary had a way of making her feel decrepit and burdensome. The visits to see Emma became increasingly difficult to arrange. Mary would claim the child was busy with activities or friends, or simply wouldn't answer the door when Barbara came by. Phone calls went unreturned, text messages were ignored. By the end of the first week, Barbara had seen her granddaughter only twice since the funeral, and both visits had been supervised by Mary, who hovered nearby with obvious impatience. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Mary called on Thursday evening, her voice artificially sweet. "Barbara, I was wondering if you could come over tomorrow afternoon. There are some things we need to discuss about David's estate." Barbara agreed, though something in Mary's tone set off alarm bells. She arrived at the house, David's house, though Mary had already begun referring to it as her house, to find her daughter-in-law waiting in the living room with a man Barbara didn't recognize. "Barbara, this is Richard Harrison, my attorney," Mary said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Please, sit down." The lawyer was a thin, sharp-featured man who looked like he specialized in hostile takeovers rather than family law. He spread several documents across the coffee table with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Morrison, we've asked you here today to discuss the transfer of David's assets to his legal heirs." Barbara felt a chill run down her spine. Transfer? Mary leaned forward, her mask of sympathy slipping slightly. Barbara, you have to understand. Emma is David's daughter. She's entitled to his estate. It's only fair that everything goes to her, with me as her guardian, of course. The lawyer nodded gravely. What we're proposing is a simple transfer of any assets that might have been inadvertently placed in your name. David was very ill toward the end, and sometimes decisions made under duress aren't legally sound. What assets? Barbara asked carefully. Mary's eyes gleamed. Don't play dumb, Barbara. I know David put some things in your name. The house, probably, maybe the cars, some bank accounts. It was sweet of you to help him out during his illness, but now it's time to do the right thing and transfer everything to Emma. Barbara looked at the papers before her, her mind racing. I'd like to review these documents with my own attorney before signing anything. Mary's mask slipped further. Your attorney? Barbara, you don't need an attorney. This is family. We're just trying to make sure Emma gets what's rightfully hers. Then you won't mind if I have a lawyer look at the paperwork first. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mary exchanged a look with her attorney, and Barbara saw frustration flash across her features. Of course, Richard Harrison said smoothly. That's your right, but I should warn you, contesting a child's inheritance could be expensive and time-consuming. Sometimes it's better to handle these matters within the family. The threat was thinly veiled. Barbara stood up slowly, her arthritis making the movement painful, but her voice steady. I'll be in touch. As she walked toward the door, Mary called after her. Barbara, I hope you'll think about what's best for Emma. She's been through enough trauma already. She doesn't need a custody battle on top of everything else. Barbara paused, her hand on the doorknob. Custody battle? Mary's smile was razor sharp. Well, if you're going to be difficult about the estate, I might have to reconsider our arrangement about visits. Emma needs stability, not confusion. And frankly, all this legal drama isn't good for a grieving child. The message was clear. Sign over the assets or lose access to Emma entirely. Barbara nodded slowly and left without another word. That night, she called David's attorney, Marcus Webb, a kind man who had handled David's affairs for years and had been like family to both of them. When she explained what had happened, his response was immediate. Don't sign anything, Barbara. Not yet. I need to show you something. They met the next morning at his office. Marcus was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and wise eyes that had seen too many family disputes tear people apart. He greeted Barbara with a gentle hug and led her to his conference room. I'm sorry for your loss. David was a good man. Thank you. Marcus, what Mary is claiming, does she have a right to demand those transfers? Marcus smiled sadly. Legally, no. David was very clear about his intentions, but I think you need to understand the full scope of what he did and why he did it. He opened a thick folder and spread the contents across the table. 3 months before his death, David came to me. He wanted to restructure his entire estate. He was very specific about his reasons. Barbara looked at the documents, deeds, account statements, insurance policies, all bearing her name as primary beneficiary or owner. The house is yours outright, Marcus explained. Both cars are titled in your name. The main savings account, the checking account, his retirement fund, all of it is yours. Emma has a trust fund set up for her education and future needs, but the bulk of the estate goes to you. But why? I mean, I understand about Mary, but surely Emma should inherit from her father. Marcus pulled out another document, David's will. He explains it all here. Read this section. Barbara put on her reading glasses and read her son's words, written in his careful handwriting. I leave the majority of my estate to my mother, Barbara Morrison, because I know she will use these resources to protect and care for my daughter Emma in the way I would want. I have lost faith in Mary's ability to put Emma's needs before her own ambitions. I believe that Mary will use any inheritance to further her own interests, potentially at the expense of Emma's emotional and financial well-being. My mother has always been my moral compass and my safe harbor. I trust her completely to do what is right for my daughter, even if that means standing up to my wife." Tears blurred Barbara's vision as she continued reading. "I know this decision may cause conflict, but I have seen enough to know that Mary is not the woman I thought I married. I hope I am wrong, but if my suspicions prove correct, I need someone strong enough to protect Emma from the consequences of her mother's choices. My mother is that person. She has the wisdom to know when to fight and when to forgive, and she has the strength to do both when necessary." The will was dated just 2 weeks before David's cancer diagnosis. Barbara looked up at Marcus through her tears. He knew, didn't he, about Mary's affair? Marcus nodded gravely. He hired investigators. He was planning to file for divorce, but then he got sick. He spent his final months trying to protect you and Emma instead of exposing Mary's betrayal. Barbara felt a surge of pride mixed with her grief. Even dying, David had been thinking of others before himself. What happens now? Well, that depends on you. Legally, everything David wanted to happen has happened. The assets are yours. Mary has no claim to them except what you choose to give her. But Barbara, Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. I need you to understand what you're dealing with. Mary has already contacted 3 different attorneys trying to find one who will challenge the will. She's claiming David was mentally incompetent when he made these changes. Was he? Absolutely not. I have medical records, witness statements, video recordings of our meetings. David was completely lucid and very deliberate about his choices. But that won't stop her from trying. And in the meantime, she'll try to keep me from Emma. Exactly. You need to be prepared for a fight, Barbara. Mary isn't going to accept this quietly. Barbara stared at the documents spread before her, feeling the weight of her son's trust and expectations. What would you advise? Marcus smiled grimly. I'd advise you to remember that David chose you to be Emma's protector, not Mary's doormat. You have all the power here, Barbara. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The formal reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. Barbara arrived at Marcus's office 15 minutes early, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She had spent the weekend in prayer and contemplation, trying to find the wisdom David had credited her with. Mary arrived precisely on time, dressed in a black suit that managed to look both mournful and businesslike. She was accompanied by Richard Harrison and another man Barbara didn't recognize. Probably another attorney, she thought. Emma was not present, which surprised Barbara, until she remembered that Mary had likely assumed this would be a routine transfer of assets to David's rightful heirs. She probably hadn't expected any complications that would require explanation to an 8-year-old. Marcus welcomed everyone into his conference room with professional courtesy, though Barbara caught the slight tightening around his eyes when he looked at Mary's legal entourage. "Thank you all for coming," he began, settling behind his desk with a copy of David's will. "We're here today for the formal reading of David Morrison's last will and testament, dated September 3rd of this year." Mary leaned forward slightly, her expression appropriately solemn. Barbara noticed that her daughter-in-law's hands were folded calmly in her lap. Not the trembling, nervous gestures of a grieving widow, but the composed posture of someone attending a business meeting. Marcus cleared his throat and began to read. "I, David Michael Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The legal preamble was standard, but Barbara could see Mary growing impatient as Marcus worked through the technical language. Her foot had begun to tap silently under the table. "To my beloved daughter, Emma Marie Morrison, I leave a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 to be used for her education and released to her in full on her 21st birthday. This trust will be administered by my mother, Barbara Morrison, who will have full discretion over its use for Emma's benefit." Mary's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained composed. $50,000 was a substantial sum for a child's education, though less than she had probably expected. "To my wife, Mary Catherine Morrison, I leave my personal effects, including jewelry, watches, and clothing, as well as the furniture currently in our shared home. I also leave her the sum of $10,000 from my life insurance policy to help with immediate expenses following my death. Now, Mary's composure cracked slightly. $10,000? That was nothing compared to what she had expected. Barbara saw her whisper something urgent to Richard Harrison, who placed a calming hand on her arm. Marcus continued reading, his voice steady and professional. The remainder of my estate, including but not limited to the house at 1247 Maple Street, both vehicles currently registered in my name, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, and the remainder of my life insurance policy, I leave to my mother, Barbara Morrison. The silence in the room was deafening. Mary's face went through a range of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. There has to be a mistake, she said, her voice tight with control. That can't be right. Marcus continued reading, and Barbara felt her son's voice speaking through the written words. I make this decision not out of any desire to punish my wife, but out of a deep conviction that my mother will use these resources to ensure my daughter's well-being and happiness. I have complete faith in her judgment and her love for Emma. I know that whatever conflicts may arise from this decision, my mother will handle them with the grace and wisdom she has shown throughout her life. Mary stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. David was sick. He was on medication. He wasn't thinking clearly. There's no way he would leave everything to his mother instead of his own family. Richard Harrison tried to pull her back down, but Mary shook him off. My husband was not in his right mind when he wrote this. I demand a psychiatric evaluation, a competency hearing, something. This will is invalid. Marcus looked up from the document, his expression patient but firm. Mrs. Morrison, I can assure you that your husband was completely competent when he made these decisions. I have documentation from his physician confirming his mental state, as well as video recordings of our meetings where he explained his reasoning in detail. Video recordings? Mary's voice climbed higher. Yes, David was very thorough. He anticipated that there might be challenges to his will, so he took steps to document his mental competency and his motivations. He gestured to a laptop on his desk. Would you like to see them? Barbara watched her daughter-in-law's face crumble as the reality of the situation sank in. All of her plans, all of her calculations, all of her assumptions about easy money and a comfortable future, it was all slipping away. This is insane, she whispered. He left me with nothing. How am I supposed to take care of Emma with $10,000 and some furniture? It was Richard Harrison who answered, his voice carefully controlled. Mrs. Morrison, we need to discuss our options privately. Perhaps we should request a recess. But Mary was beyond reasonable counsel. She turned on Barbara with fury blazing in her eyes. You did this, didn't you? You poisoned him against me? You convinced a sick, dying man to leave everything to you instead of his own family? Barbara stood up slowly, feeling every one of her 73 years, but also feeling the strength that David had believed she possessed. I never asked David for anything, she said quietly. I never even knew about any of this until after he died. Liar! Mary's composure had completely shattered. You manipulated him, played on his guilt, made him think I was some kind of monster. Were you? Barbara's voice was soft, but it cut through Mary's rage like a blade. Were you a monster, Mary? The question hung in the air. Mary's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Marcus intervened gently. Perhaps we should take a break. This is obviously emotional for everyone. But Barbara wasn't finished. She had been silent too long, had swallowed too many insults, had watched too many cruelties without speaking up. David had trusted her to protect Emma, and that protection had to start here, in this room, with the truth. David knew about the affair, Mary. The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through the room. Mary's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. He hired investigators. He had photos, phone records, credit card statements. He knew you were cheating on him months before he got sick. Barbara's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. He was planning to divorce you, but then the cancer came, and instead of exposing you, he spent his final months trying to protect Emma from the fallout. Mary sank back into her chair, all the fight suddenly gone out of her. He knew you would try to take everything, Barbara continued. He knew you would squeeze me out of Emma's life if it served your purposes. He knew you would put your own desires ahead of Emma's needs. And everything that's happened since his funeral has proven him right. The silence stretched on. Finally, Richard Harrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morrison," he addressed Barbara. "My client is obviously distraught. Perhaps there's some arrangement we can work out. A settlement that would be fair to everyone involved." Barbara looked at Mary, who was staring at her hands in her lap, and felt a complex mixture of pity and resolve. This woman had broken her son's heart, had performed grief instead of feeling it, had tried to manipulate and threaten her way to an inheritance she didn't deserve. But she was also Emma's mother, and Emma needed stability, not warfare. "There is an arrangement," Barbara said finally, "but it's not negotiable." She had everyone's attention now. "The house is mine, and I'm going to live in it. Emma can live there too if she wants. Mary, you can live there as well, but only if you agree to certain conditions." Mary looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "First, Emma comes first in all decisions. Her emotional needs, her education, her relationships with both sides of her family. Second, no more meetings or mysterious appointments that require Emma to be shuffled around to babysitters. Third, you will facilitate my relationship with Emma, not obstruct it. And fourth," Barbara paused, making sure she had Mary's full attention, "you will get counseling. For Emma's sake, you need to deal with whatever drove you to have an affair and to treat your dying husband's mother with such cruelty." Mary's jaw tightened. "And if I don't agree? Then you're welcome to find your own place to live, with your $10,000 and your furniture. Emma will still be welcome in my home whenever she wants, and I'll make sure she understands that she always has a choice about where she lives." The threat was clear, and Mary was smart enough to understand it. A custody battle between a grieving widow and a financially stable grandmother would not automatically go in Mary's favor, especially with evidence of adultery and emotional neglect. "You can't take Emma from me," Mary said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I don't want to take Emma from you," Barbara replied honestly. "I want you to be the mother she deserves. David saw something in you once that made him fall in love with you, made him want to build a life with you. Maybe that woman is still in there somewhere. For Emma's sake, I hope she is." Richard Harrison whispered urgently in Mary's ear, but she waved him off. "I need time to think about this." "Take all the time you need," Barbara said, "but Emma starts staying with me on weekends, starting this Saturday. That's not negotiable." As the meeting broke up, Marcus walked Barbara to her car. "That was well handled," he said with approval. "David would be proud." Barbara looked back at the office building, where Mary was still inside, probably strategizing with her lawyers about next steps. "I hope I did the right thing. Part of me wanted to just cut her off entirely, take Emma and never look back. But you didn't. That's what makes you the right person to raise Emma. You chose mercy over revenge, but you didn't choose mercy over justice. There's a difference." That Saturday, Emma came to stay with Barbara for the first time since the funeral. The little girl was quiet at first, uncertain about the new arrangement, but as the day wore on, she began to relax. "Grandma Barbara?" Emma's voice broke through her reverie as they reached the car. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Daddy knew this would all work out okay?" Barbara looked over Emma's head at Mary, who was staring back toward David's grave with an expression of genuine remorse and something that might have been gratitude. Then she looked down at Emma. Bright, resilient Emma, who had survived the loss of her father and the upheaval of her world with grace that amazed Barbara every day. "I think your daddy was a very smart man," Barbara said finally, "and I think he knew that love finds a way, even when everything seems impossible." 2 years later, Barbara was in her kitchen making Emma's favorite cookies when she heard the front door open. Emma's voice called out cheerfully, followed by Mary's quieter greeting. They had been to Emma's school play together, the first time Mary had attended one of her daughter's events without being reminded or cajoled. "Grandma Barbara, you should have seen me!" Emma burst into the kitchen, still wearing her costume from the play. "I remembered all my lines, and Mrs. Peterson said I was the best tree in the whole forest." Barbara laughed, pulling Emma into a flower-dusted hug. "I'm sorry I missed it, sweetheart, but I want to hear every detail." Mary appeared in the doorway holding Emma's backpack and jacket. She looked tired but peaceful in a way that had taken months to develop. "She really was wonderful," Mary said, and Barbara heard genuine pride in her voice. "You would have been proud." It was a small thing, Mary's acknowledgement that Barbara had a right to be proud of Emma, but it represented years of slow, careful progress. The counseling had helped, but what had helped more was watching Emma flourish under Barbara's care, seeing the child blossom in ways that Mary's previous parenting style had never allowed. "I'm proud every day," Barbara replied, smoothing Emma's hair. "Now, who wants cookies?" As Emma chattered about the play and Mary actually listened, asking questions and showing interest, Barbara felt a familiar presence. Not supernatural, but the warm certainty that David's spirit lived on in the love that surrounded his daughter. The phone rang, interrupting the domestic scene. Barbara answered it, expecting one of her neighbors or perhaps the church secretary about the upcoming bake sale. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Jennifer Walsh with the state police. I'm calling about an investigation we're conducting into some financial irregularities at Morrison Construction Company." Barbara's blood ran cold. Morrison Construction had been David's business, the company he had built from nothing and had been so proud of. After his death, Mary had hired a manager to run it, claiming she would take over once she got back on her feet. "What kind of irregularities?" Barbara asked, stepping away from Emma and Mary. "We have evidence that funds have been diverted from company accounts over the past 18 months. Unauthorized transfers, falsified invoices, that sort of thing. We believe someone with access to the company's financial records has been embezzling money. I was hoping you could come in and answer some questions, since you're listed as a beneficiary on some of the accounts." Barbara glanced at Mary, who had gone very still at the kitchen table. Emma was still talking about the play, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the room. "Of course," Barbara said. "When would you like me to come in? Would tomorrow at 10 work? And Mrs. Morrison, you might want to bring your attorney." After Barbara hung up, the kitchen was silent except for Emma's voice as she acted out scenes from the play to an increasingly distracted audience. "Mary," Barbara said quietly, "we need to talk. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and start your homework? I'll bring you some cookies in a few minutes." Emma sensed the adult tension and obediently gathered her things. "Are you in trouble, Grandma Barbara?" "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Go on up." When Emma's footsteps faded on the stairs, Barbara turned to Mary, who was staring at her hands folded on the table. "How much did you take?" Mary's shoulders sagged. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to pay it back." "How much, Mary?" "About 60,000. Over the last year and a half." Mary's voice was barely audible. "I was trying to save money to move out, to get my own place for Emma and me. I thought if I could just become independent, we could start over somewhere else." Barbara sank into the chair across from her. $60,000. "Mary, that's embezzlement. That's a felony." "I know." Tears were streaming down Mary's face now. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was going to tell you. I was going to figure out a way to pay it back. But then the investigation started and you decided to let me walk into that police station tomorrow without knowing anything about it?" Mary looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "No, I didn't know they were going to call you. I thought they were just investigating the books, looking at the manager I hired. I never meant for you to get involved." Barbara studied Mary's face, looking for signs of deception. She had gotten good at reading her daughter-in-law over the past 2 years, and what she saw now was genuine panic and remorse. "Why didn't you just ask me for money if you needed it?" "Because—" Mary's voice rose, then dropped again as she remembered Emma upstairs. "Because I wanted to do something for myself. I wanted to prove I could take care of Emma without depending on your charity. I wanted to feel like I had some control over my own life." It was the most honest thing Mary had said in years, and Barbara felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. She had been so focused on protecting Emma and honoring David's wishes that she had perhaps forgotten that Mary was also struggling, also trying to find her footing in a world that had been turned upside down. "So what's your plan now?" Mary wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. "I don't have one. I guess I'm going to prison, and Emma will hate me, and you'll finally get what you wanted. Complete custody of her." "Is that what you think I wanted? Isn't it?" Mary's voice was bitter now. "You've been waiting for me to mess up so you could prove that David was right to leave everything to you instead of his wife." Barbara was quiet for a long moment, thinking about David, about the weight of the trust he had placed in her, about the complex web of love and resentment and obligation that had defined their family for the past 2 years. "Mary, I never wanted you to fail. I wanted you to succeed, for Emma's sake, yes, but also because David loved you once, and I wanted to believe that woman was still in there somewhere." Mary laughed bitterly. "Well, she's not. The woman David loved was a lie. I've been lying about who I am for so long that I don't even know what's real anymore." "Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Tomorrow morning, you're going to come with me to the police station. You're going to tell them exactly what you told me. You're going to make arrangements to pay back every penny you took, even if it takes you years. And you're going to accept whatever consequences come from that." "Barbara, I could go to prison. Emma could end up in foster care." "Emma will never end up in foster care," Barbara said firmly. "I'll make sure of that. But Mary, you can't keep running from the truth. You can't keep making choices based on fear and desperation. If you want to be the mother Emma deserves, you have to start by being honest about who you are and what you've done." Mary stared at her for a long moment. "Why would you help me? After everything I've done, everything I've put you through. Why?" Barbara thought about David, about the grace he had shown even in his final days when he could have exposed Mary's affair and destroyed her reputation. He had chosen protection over revenge, love over justice. Maybe it was time for Barbara to make the same choice. Because Emma needs her mother, not the perfect mother you've been pretending to be, but the real mother you could become if you stopped running from yourself. The next morning, Barbara and Mary sat side by side in Detective Walsh's office. Mary had spent most of the night crying, but she had also spent time writing out a complete confession, detailing every transaction, every falsified document, every lie she had told. Detective Walsh was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened as Mary read her statement, asking clarifying questions but showing no judgment. "Mrs. Morrison," she said when Mary finished, "I appreciate your honesty. This makes our investigation much simpler. However, you understand that the district attorney will have to decide whether to prosecute." "I understand," Mary said quietly. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my actions." "The good news is that you're cooperating fully and you've expressed willingness to make restitution. That will work in your favor. The bad news is that $60,000 is a substantial amount. Even with cooperation, you're likely looking at some jail time." Barbara squeezed Mary's hand. "We'll deal with whatever comes." Over the following weeks, Mary worked with a criminal attorney to negotiate a plea agreement. The prosecutor, influenced by Mary's cooperation and her status as a single mother, agreed to a sentence of 6 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation and community service. It wasn't easy explaining to Emma why her mother would be going away for a while. They sat together on the porch swing where Barbara had comforted Emma so many times before, trying to find age-appropriate words for concepts like embezzlement and accountability. Mommy made some bad choices about money, and now she has to go away for a little while to think about those choices and learn how to make better ones. Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the serious expression she had developed since her father's death. Is she going to prison? There was no point in lying. Yes, sweetheart, but it's not like the scary prisons you see on TV. It's a place where people go to think about their mistakes and learn how to do better. Will she come back? Yes. She'll come back in 6 months, and then she'll live here with us again, just like before. Emma nodded solemnly. Daddy would want her to learn how to do better, wouldn't he? Barbara felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, I think he would. The day Mary left for prison, she hugged Emma goodbye on the front steps of the house that had become their shared home. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered into Emma's hair. I'm sorry for all the mistakes I made, but I'm going to do better when I come back, I promise. Emma, now 10 years old and wise beyond her years, hugged her mother tightly. I love you, Mommy, even when you make mistakes. On the 3rd anniversary of David's death, the 3 of them visited his grave together, as had become their tradition. Emma, now 11, had written a letter to her father that she read aloud at his headstone. Dear Daddy, I miss you every day, but I want you to know that we're all doing okay. Grandma Barbara takes really good care of me, and she taught me how to make your favorite cookies. Mommy is different now. She's more real, if that makes sense. She listens when I talk, and she doesn't pretend everything is perfect all the time. I think you would like her better now. I hope you're proud of all of us for figuring out how to be a family, even though it's not the kind of family we thought we would be. After Mary left, Barbara and Emma settled into a new routine. Barbara had worried that Emma might be traumatized by her mother's incarceration, but the child seemed almost relieved to have the truth finally out in the open. It's like when I broke your favorite vase and tried to hide it, Emma told Barbara one evening. It felt worse keeping the secret than it did getting in trouble. They visited Mary every weekend, driving the 2 hours to the minimum security facility where she was serving her sentence. Mary looked different in her prison uniform. Smaller, more vulnerable, but also somehow cleaner, as if the weight of her secrets had been physically lifted from her shoulders. How are your classes going? Barbara asked during one visit. Mary had enrolled in vocational training and counseling programs, determined to use her time productively. Good, really good. I'm learning about bookkeeping, the legal kind, this time. Mary managed a small smile. And the therapy sessions? They're helping me understand why I made such bad choices. Emma bounced in her chair. Grandma Barbara is teaching me how to bake. I made a cake all by myself last week. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I can't wait to try your baking when I come home. As they drove back from these visits, Barbara often reflected on the strange journey their family had taken. David's death had set in motion a chain of events that had revealed the worst and best in all of them. Mary's greed and deception, yes, but also her capacity for growth and accountability. Barbara's own struggle between justice and mercy, between protection and forgiveness. 6 months later, Mary came home to a house decorated with welcome home banners made by Emma and a dinner table set with Barbara's best china. Thank you, Mary said quietly as they sat down to eat, for not giving up on me, for not taking Emma away when you had every right to. We're family, Barbara replied simply. Complicated, messy family, but family nonetheless. Mary was different after prison. Quieter, more thoughtful, less focused on appearances, and more interested in substance. She got a job as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit, work that felt meaningful rather than just lucrative. She continued with counseling, working through the issues that had led to her affair and her subsequent poor choices. Most importantly, she became present for Emma in a way she had never been before. Not the performative mothering she had done during her marriage, but genuine engagement with her daughter's thoughts and feelings and dreams. Emma flourished under this new dynamic. She had her grandmother's steady wisdom and her mother's slowly emerging authenticity, plus the security of knowing that the adults in her life had learned to put her needs first. As Emma finished reading, Barbara felt a profound sense of completion. David's final gift hadn't just been financial security. It had been the framework for redemption, the opportunity for all of them to become better versions of themselves. Mary, standing beside David's grave, spoke for the first time in 3 years to her deceased husband. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, David, but I want you to know that I'm trying to become the woman you thought you were marrying. It's taken me too long to get here, but I'm finally becoming someone Emma can be proud of. Thank you for loving her enough to make sure she would always be safe, even from me." Walking back to the car, Emma between them, as always, Barbara reflected on the power of patience, of waiting for truth to reveal itself, of choosing hope over cynicism even when all the evidence suggested cynicism was more realistic. "Grandma Barbara," Emma's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think we'll always be together like this?" Barbara looked across Emma's head at Mary, who had become not a friend exactly, but a true partner in the work of raising this remarkable child. "I think we'll always be family," Barbara said. "The shape of that family might change as you grow up, but the love that holds us together, that will always be there." Years later, when Emma graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, she would give a speech about resilience and redemption that would make both her grandmother and her mother cry. She would talk about learning that love isn't always easy or comfortable, but it's always worth fighting for. She would mention her father, who had loved her enough to ensure her security even in death, and her grandmother, who had shown her strength could be gentle and wisdom could be patient. She would mention her mother, who had taught her that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to define you, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was tell the truth about yourself. But on this day, 3 years after David's death, Emma was still just an 11-year-old girl walking between two women who had learned to love her more than they disliked each other. Carrying flowers home from her father's grave and chattering about her upcoming school project on family trees. "I'm going to include Daddy even though he's not here anymore. Mrs. Patterson said family trees should show everyone who helped make you who you are." "That's perfect, sweetheart," Barbara said, squeezing Emma's hand. "And I'm going to write about how families can be broken and put back together in new ways, and how love is stronger than death, and how sometimes the worst things that happen to you can teach you the most important lessons." Mary and Barbara exchanged a look over Emma's head, a look of shared amazement at the wisdom of this child they were raising together, this living testament to David's faith in the power of love to triumph over every kind of betrayal and loss. As they reached the car and began the drive home, Barbara thought about the weight of silence she had carried during those terrible early days after David's death. The silence that had allowed her to observe, to understand, to choose her battles carefully and strategically. That silence had been her greatest strength, but the breaking of silence, Mary's confession, her own honesty about David's knowledge of the affair, Emma's frank questions about difficult topics, that had ultimately saved them all. David's final gift hadn't just been financial security or legal protection. It had been the gift of time. Time for truth to emerge. Time for people to reveal their true characters. Time for love to do its slow work of transformation. Sitting in the passenger seat as Mary drove them home, watching Emma in the rearview mirror as she sketched ideas for her family tree project, Barbara felt the deep satisfaction of a trust well kept, a love well honored, a family well protected. David would have been proud. He asked as they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset, "Why did Daddy leave you the house?" It was a complicated question for an 8-year-old, but Barbara had had time to think about her answer. "Your daddy knew that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart. He wanted to make sure you always had a safe place to come to, no matter what happened. If Mommy gets mean again." Barbara's heart clenched. "Has Mommy been mean to you?" Emma shrugged, a gesture that was far too mature for her age. "She cries a lot, and she gets mad when I ask about Daddy or want to visit his grave. She says I need to forget about him and move on. You never have to forget about your daddy, Emma. He will always love you, and it's okay to miss him and want to talk about him. Can we visit him tomorrow? At the cemetery?" "Of course we can." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle motion of the swing soothing both of them. Finally, Emma spoke again. "Grandma Barbara, I'm glad I get to live with you sometimes. It feels safe here." Barbara wrapped her arm around her granddaughter and held her close. "It will always be safe here, sweetheart. That's a promise." Over the following months, the arrangement gradually settled into a routine. Mary, faced with the choice between swallowing her pride or finding herself homeless, agreed to Barbara's conditions. She moved into the guest room at the house that had once been hers to rule, accepting her new status with barely concealed resentment. The counseling sessions were obviously difficult for Mary. She attended them with the same mechanical compliance she had brought to everything else. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, changes began to appear. She started asking Emma about her day instead of just telling her to be quiet. She stopped scheduling mysterious appointments during Emma's school events. She even, on one memorable occasion, suggested they visit David's grave together. "I think I owe him an apology," she said her quietly as they stood beside his headstone. I wasn't a very good wife." Emma, now 9 years old and growing wiser beyond her age, slipped her hand into her mother's and said, "Daddy forgave people when they made mistakes. He told me that." Barbara watched from a respectful distance as Mary knelt beside her daughter and finally, genuinely, grieved for the husband she had betrayed and lost. It wasn't a perfect arrangement. Mary and Barbara would never be friends, would never fully trust each other, but they had found a way to coexist for Emma's sake. And Emma was thriving. The little girl split her time between her grandmother's nurturing stability and her mother's slowly improving attention. She excelled in school, made friends, and most importantly, kept her father's memory alive through stories and photographs and visits to his grave. On the first anniversary of David's death, the three of them stood together at his headstone. Emma placed fresh flowers on the grave, while Mary and Barbara stood on opposite sides of her, united in their love for the child between them. "I miss you, Daddy," Emma whispered. "But I'm okay. Grandma Barbara takes care of me, and Mommy is trying harder. I think you'd be proud of us." Barbara felt tears roll down her cheeks as she looked at the inscription on David's headstone, "Beloved son, father, and friend." He had been all of those things, and more. He had been a protector even in death, a man who had found a way to safeguard the people he loved even when he could no longer be there to do it himself. As they walked back to the car, Emma between the two women who were shaping her future, Barbara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had learned that sometimes love looks like silence, the silence that waits and watches and chooses its moments carefully. She had learned that strength isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's quiet and patient and immovable. Most importantly, she had learned that David's final gift wasn't really the house or the money or the cars. His final gift was the opportunity to prove that she was worthy of his trust, that she could be the protector and nurturer he had believed her to be. "Grandma Barbara,